Welcome to an Internet Town Hall with State Senator Ted Lieu. Tonight's topic is California's budget. Now, live from Sacramento, here's tonight's moderator, Brian Green.
Hello, everybody. Welcome here to this broadcast from the state capitol in Sacramento. It is an annual rite of passage here in Sacramento and the state capitol, as familiar as the passing of winter and the onset of spring. It is the annual state budget process, a fiscal rite of passage that begins here in Sacramento in January with the governor's release of his proposed state budget, and that culminates come summertime in a spending plan that resonates throughout California and, in theory, reflects the values of California and how much money we allocate to our schools, our students, our courts, our roads, our counties and cities, and our brothers and sisters who are most in need. But those priorities have been turned upside down a lot in the last decade, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years, where deep budget deficits and recession took California to the fiscal brink, leading to months-long deadlock in Sacramento and a crisis of confidence all through the state. But amazingly, blessedly, fast-forwarding here to fiscal year 2013, the state's economy is recovering slowly. Voter-supported mandates require the legislature to pass a state budget with a simple majority of votes, and also, thanks to the voters' overwhelming approval of Proposition 30 in last November's general election, a tax increase that takes California's school funding and funding of other programs a little farther back from the chopping block. And so here we are in the spring of 2013 with a state fiscal plan with underlying expenditures and revenues roughly in balance. And in fact, even this week, reports of income tax returns that have led to projections that California will finish this month of April billions of dollars ahead of estimates. And this would have been hard to imagine, really, even a year ago. But the robust budget projections are quickly tempered by warning of restraint because this economic recovery is so fragile. And in fact, even the governor is telling optimistic Capitol reporters, let's not break out the party hats yet, just wait. Well, as we wait, we wonder and estimate and project what will our 2013-2014 state budget look like in the end, and what's the status of funding for California's priorities. Does the debate now turn, as it has in the past, from how we survive without cutting more to how do we prioritize spending what we have now, and maybe even save some for that proverbial rainy day? Is it doom averted or doom deferred? Now, maybe that's a little bit of over drama here, but we will talk about the dynamics, the hopes, and the realities of the 2013 state budget in this hour, and we will take your questions as well. And our guest for this program, we welcome State Senator Ted Lieu, representing the 28th Senate District in Southern California, the west side of LA, and Carson, El Segundo, Hermosa Beach, Redondo Beach, Manhattan Beach, as well as Torrance, San Pedro. You've got the whole coastal area. Yes. Senator, welcome to you. We're glad to have you.
Thank you.
And you are also the chair of the Senate Labor and Industrial Relations Committee, so
yes,
you bring that perspective with us tonight. And also Mac Taylor, who is for now 4.5 years the legislative analyst in the state of California, whose office has been providing nonpartisan fiscal and policy advice to the legislature for more than 70 years. A nonpartisan analyst in a partisan world, I guess, as you say. So Mac Taylor, welcome to our program
Thank
here.
you.
And folks, we do want your questions as well. Several folks have submitted questions in the few days leading up to this broadcast, but we want your questions too. As you hear this dialogue and conversation and something prompts you to ask a follow-up question, just to the right of your screen, you're going to see a prompt with your name and the information where you're watching, where you're viewing. Enter that information, that question into the box, hit submit, and if we can, we'll try to get your questions, as many as possible, before we end this program here tonight. So gentlemen, glad to have you here. Let's talk about this budget. Here we are in 2013. We never thought we'd see it. Senator Lieu, as a legislator, particularly also as a former assembly member, you have seen California at its most grim fiscally, the impact that it's had on constituents, but also even on here in the state legislature and your colleagues. Does it feel odd to say the word surplus and balance?
I have heard two words together I've never heard before, and that's structural surplus. So that's what we have this year. And if you look at our economic recovery, last year we created more jobs than any other state at a higher rate. Our unemployment has now dropped to 9.4%, the lowest in over 4 years. Our credit rating went from negative to stable to positive, and we have a projected surplus not only for this year, but also for next year. And I believe California is now turning the corner. And so I'm very excited to be here. Would like to listen to questions that people in California have and also to discuss priorities that we have in the state.
Great. We'll definitely talk about what's happening to California as we turn that corner. And our legislative analyst, Mac Taylor, tell us first, for those folks out there who aren't living and breathing in this world of budget and fiscal issues, tell us what the Leg Analyst Office is, actually.
Well, as you said, we've been around for a long time. We were created so the legislature wouldn't be dependent on information provided by the executive branch. So we tend to serve as the eyes and the ears for the legislature, making sure that state programs are running as effective and efficiently as possible. So we provide advice and information to the legislature to help them make decisions. We also have a role in the various ballot issues. When voters go to vote at a general election, that voter guide that they have, we do the analysis for the various measures that appear on the ballot.
Well, I really wasn't being glib when I made the comment about a nonpartisan analyst in a partisan world. I mean, actually, that was language from you folks. I mean, you are in a position to, the numbers aren't political, they aren't Republican or Democrat, and sometimes you do have to kind of take the wind out of legislators or even a governor when you say, well, with all due respect, ladies and gentlemen, here's the fiscal reality.
Well, in the legislature over the years, regardless of who's been in control or who the governor is, what party they represent, the legislature has been very good about letting us kind of do our job independently. We provide our best take on information. It doesn't mean they have to agree with us, but they've let us take our best shot at it, and then they're free to use that information however they want.
Well, you probably deserve a Purple Heart in the world of fiscal reality, because you jumped into this job 4.5 years ago, really when things were at their grimmest in a long time. So you really hit the ground running with your job.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Not running away, but running right into it.
Yeah,
so.
It really did start right when I took over, and it was 4 really tough years where we've had to make the legislatures had to make very difficult choices. But, you know, as the senator said, things are looking better. We always come back, but in this case, it's been a much longer journey. And we still have a ways to go if you look at employment numbers. We're doing much better. As the senator said, we're adding jobs at a faster rate than the nation, but we were so far below where everybody was on the numbers of our job losses. We still have a ways to go, but things are looking up.
So, Senator, do you think then that we really should temper our expectations, especially this early end of the year, with our May revise coming up this next month?
Well, we should continue to be fiscally prudent, but I do believe we need to restore some of the cuts we've made over the last 5 years or so. And I think education, particularly K through 12 and higher education, are where we should spend a lot of the funds to restore the cuts we've made and to restore it in a fair manner.
Mac, I know that you are, in addition to an analyzer, you can be an educator here. I know you have brought some charts, some graphics with us to kind of let us know, let those who are watching know how we got to where we are, what we are doing now, and what are some of the factors that we are dealing with this current budget situation.
Yeah.
So we'll let you take over here for a couple of minutes.
Great. Just some really basic charts that might help orient people about how we spend our money and some background on the problems that we've experienced. This first chart is just about how we spend our so-called general fund money. This is the fund over which we've had the big discussions about our deficits. And you can see that about half the money goes to education, with a big chunk going to those K-12 districts. The money's sent down to locals. It's not really spent up here. It's given to locals and they spend it. And then a big chunk of money also goes to prisons and to health and social service programs. This next chart just shows you the kind of problems we've experienced in recent years. All those red bars are budget deficits that my office had forecast prior to the start of the year. And you can see in recent years they've been in the tens of billions of dollars on a state general fund budget that's less than $100 billion. So these were huge percentages that we were experiencing as far as the deficits that we were running and had to address. The next chart, actually the next two, show you just how dependent the state is on personal income taxes. And it's about 2/3 of our general fund comes from personal income taxes that people have just finished up paying, or in some cases maybe getting refunds because they overpaid on their withholding. But of that personal income tax, you can see that the top 1% of taxpayers in some years pay close to half of the personal income taxes. And that has real implications for how volatile our revenue can be. It can go up really well during good times, but it can drop precipitously during bad times. And the next chart kind of shows that. The dark blue line are the percentage changes in personal income taxes. And you can see while they went up very high, close to 30% back in the turn of the decade or the start of this decade, the 2000s, they also fell by dramatic amounts. And it's because we have so much income and taxes paid by a very small number of people. They have a lot of control over the way that they manage their tax situation, on when they realize capital gains, et cetera. our revenues can go up and down dramatically, and that's been one of our problems in trying to deal with our budget.
Okay.
So I think, let's see, was that our last chart? I think we have one more chart. This comes to, well, have we solved all of our problems? Our budget seems to be in balance, and one thing we've reminded the legislature of, we have a lot of other obligations that we may need to address. And one of the biggest ones is that top bar there. You see it's about $160 billion in retirement-related obligations. And we need to get some of these paid off. These are liabilities that we have not funded.
So obviously when the governor said yesterday, responding to the optimistic reporters, just wait. We still have a lot of healing to do. We still have a lot of way to go. And then, of course, we have a May revise figure, as I mentioned. The May revisions, the final amount of the tax receipts, and then the governor adjusts his budget that he presents to the legislature. That's pretty much how this process goes, right? Okay. Any other perspective on this here, Senator, from what Max showed us before we dive into the emails at all?
No, I look forward to the questions.
Great. We will go right to them now. And again, we encourage you, if you have a question here as we go along, that we will make sure that we take your emails just to the right of the screen. Feel free to put your name in with your location where you are watching, enter your question, hit submit. We'll try to get to as many as we can here before we wrap up within the hour. First question is from Chris from Manhattan Beach. He says, pretend for a minute that raising taxes is not an option to balance the budget. What do you cut to balance the budget?
Well, the good news is this year we don't have to cut anything because we not only have a balanced budget, but we're running about a $4 billion surplus as of today. However, the best way to balance a budget in the long term and to not have to do any cuts in the long term is to grow our economy. And we're not going to succeed in California here making socks. Our land value is too high, our cost of living is too high. It's going to be in those areas where we have a competitive advantage. And if you look at our economy, about 70% or so is in 15 to 20 industry sectors. My view of how we succeed is we have to be competitive and incentivize those competitive advantages that we have. So for example, we have a very good high-tech area. We've got a very robust biotech economy. We have agriculture. Most of the lettuce that you eat is from California. Virtually all the almonds in the entire world come from California. We have an entertainment sector. We have ports. So Kansas is never going to build a deep water port, right? And Switzerland will never have ports. And if we can just incentivize these industries, and travel and tourism is another one. North Dakota is not going to get the 41 million visitors that LA County alone got last year. So my view is we have to grow our economy, and by that we get more revenues in, and then we don't have to make any cuts.
All right. Thank you very much for that question, Chris. Another Chris with another question from Torrance. This Chris says, if deep cuts have been made to the budget, why does the budget continue to grow?
Sure, I'm happy to answer that, but maybe I could just say, I want to answer the easy question.
Sure.
And Mac here can answer the hard
okay.
question. No, but the reason, I'll take a crack at that.
Yes.
The reason the budget continues to grow is the same reason that your ice cream cone costs more now than it did 10 years ago. Just natural inflation of prices causes everything to go up. And when you have a statewide budget for 38 million people, you're going to have increased amounts in the budget simply because of things such as inflation. And I think Mac probably has a
you want to take this hard question?
Well, no,
Mac?
sure. I think it's a very reasonable question. The most direct answer is that state spending has gone down. If you measure it against 2007-8, which was kind of our last normal year before the Great Recession hit, spending has fallen in absolute dollars. If you were to take into account some of the factors that the Senator mentioned, impacts of inflation and increased number of people, it's fallen even more. But some programs do grow even in the last 4 years as our overall budget resources have gone down. We have some programs that are meant to provide people with assistance when times are tough. Social service programs, certain welfare programs, and they go up faster during a downturn. So you have a mix of programs that you don't have a lot of control over. In some cases, the federal government or the courts have restricted our ability to make changes. So you can't make changes in some things, which means you have to make it in other areas where you have more discretion. Schools, we've made reductions. In higher education, we have relied more on tuition. So even though their total funding was offset by some of the general fund cuts, it's still their spending went down. So it's not a real simple question to answer, but we have spent less, than where we were in 2007-8.
And we really had no choice, actually, right?
Well, you could have always increased revenues. It's tough to do during that kind of time, and we did increase some fees and we accelerated some revenues. But we relied largely on slowing the growth in spending on many programs and real reductions in others.
Good. Well, I'll leave it up to both of you to buttress each other on the hard and the easy questions here. So thank you very much for that question, Chris. We go to another one here from Bill from Los Angeles. He asks, has the governor, all members of the Senate, and Congress taken definitive cuts in the pay and extra perks? Now, obviously, he may or may not be referring to the federal government, but we can even zero down here to you and your colleagues in the legislature. Have you borne your side of this fiscal issue here the last couple of years?
Absolutely. I make less now than I did when I first entered the legislature. And our pay is not set by us. It's set by Independent Citizens Commission, and they have given us pay cuts. They've also eliminated other benefits that we used to have. But before even all of that happened, when I was in the Assembly, I voluntarily decided not to accept a pay raise that they had offered because I realized we were facing a budget crisis. I also gave up the state gas card and did a number of other things. So absolutely, we've had less pay than we used to have.
Okay, great. Thank you for that question. Just in case you've joined us, this is a live internet town hall talking about the 2013 state budget. Our guest is State Senator Ted Lieu, representing the 28th Senate District in Southern California, and Mac Taylor, who is the legislative analyst here in the state of California. Our next question is from Carol from Marina Del Rey. She asks, how much of that Prop 30 money has gone to the classrooms and or specifically related projects for our children's education? And I'm glad actually somebody brought that up, because I do want to talk about how key was the passage of Prop 30 to our livelihood and how we're thriving here in April of 2013.
So one reason we have a balanced budget is because we made year after year of cuts. And so we were very fiscally prudent. We made very hard choices. In addition, last year we had an assist by the voters in terms of Prop 30, where we also got some revenues. So we were facing about a $13 billion or so budget deficit last year. We cut about $6 to $7 billion, and then we had revenues now come in from Prop 30 to close that gap. So the Prop 30 funds are going to be directed at schools, and my view is they should go to benefit all schools.
Any perspective on that, Mac?
Yeah, I think it was a little tough to answer that question for the current year because the legislature had an alternative budget had Proposition 30 not passed. It's a little easier to answer for the future, and that is Prop 30 revenues are just like general fund revenues. It's like we increased any tax revenue. And because of our formulas that dictate how much we spend on schools, it's called Proposition 98.
Right.
Roughly half of the monies will have to go for increased spending on schools. That's a simplistic answer because it can range anywhere from 40% of the new monies to almost 100%. And I won't bore the viewers by all of the formulas. But I think to think about it in general, the Proposition 30 added new resources to the state budget, roughly half that had to go to schools under our existing formulas, the other half which are available for the legislature to spend on whatever reasons they want. More school spending, higher ed, courts, whatever.
Prop 30 does sunset eventually. Some would say we're just kicking the can down the road, that proverbial cliche we hear a lot when we talk about the budget. Do you see it that way?
Well, it depends on what we do. And so if we spend surplus money all on recurring programs, then we may run into problems later on. If we spend some of that one-time expenditures, we'll face less of a problem. And if we keep growing our economy, then we're not going to have any problem at all.
Great. Thank you for these great questions, folks. We'll go to the next one. This is George from Torrance. He said, according to Education Week, that's a periodical here, we rank 49th out of 50 states in the nation for the level of support we give our public schools. The governor believes more funding should go to meet the needs of some students, but does his new formula address the low level of funding that California now provides for all students? If not, should it not be addressed as part of the reform? Now, this is, again, another interesting, timely question. The education funding, and it seems in this budget year, which has so far been a pretty non-controversial budget year, this is one of the most controversial elements is the governor's education funding plan. How do you respond to the question here?
Sure. So first of all, I have two children in public school, a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old. And if they're watching now, they actually shouldn't be. They should be doing their homework. But I do absolutely want to increase funding to our public schools. And that's one reason I have always voted for increased funding for K through 12 education. The surplus we have right now in terms of revenue projections, I believe most, if not a overwhelming majority of that, should also go through to public schools as well. I do believe we need to make the funding fair. And so I support the goals of the governor's local control funding formula, but the specifics I do differ on. So I'll give you an example. There's a difference between having all school districts rise and some rise some more. So you have winners plus big winners versus a system where you actually have school districts that are going to get less next year than they otherwise would have if we just did nothing. So in that case, you actually have losers and winners. And to me, that's not defensible. We need to have a system where all school districts rise, and if someone rises some more, that's fine. In addition, I think there is a view that we should take that, which is the reality. We've cut schools for 5 years, very, very large cuts. I think we need to start restoring funds from those 5 years of cuts to all school districts, make them all rise before we start taking funds from one school district and giving it to another. Now, I don't have any philosophical objection. I think it's actually a good thing that we support schools that have English language learners and students with reduced and free meals. I do note that is not why the voters voted for Proposition 30. It was not explained to them that this was a vote to help students who are learning English and students who have free or reduced meals, even though those are worthy goals. Prop 30 was explained to the voters as something that would prevent cuts to all school districts, increase education to all school districts, and politicians can't touch that funding. That's how it was explained to the voters. And to now do a massive shift where you're essentially taking money from certain school districts and giving it to another, that's not what the voters voted for. It breaks faith with them. Mm-hmm. And so the Senate Democratic Caucus is introducing legislation that will make the governor's local control funding formula more fair. So instead of having dramatic winners and losers, hopefully we can get to a place where we have all winners and then some will win some more.
Okay. Any perspective on this from the nonpartisan legislative analyst's office?
There's a lot of questions in there. We could spend an hour just on aspects of this question. Let me answer a couple of aspects of it. They asked, does the governor's funding formula, this local control funding formula that the senator mentioned, does it deal with the overall level of funding? No, it does not. It's not intended to. Overall funding is really determined by Proposition 98. And under our forecast, assuming the economy continues to recover even moderately, there's going to be a lot of new money each year for schools. And after 3 or 4 years, they could be in very good shape. We could restore all the cuts because the money has to be spent under Proposition 98. Mm-hmm. But the governor's new funding formula is not intended to address the level of adequacy of the funding. It's on how we spend the money that we have. And it involves a lot of changes to the system that would take us a lot longer than we have. But fundamentally, it's trying to say, we had a lot of what we called categorical fundings where we directed pots of money that districts had to spend on. The governor wants to get rid of most of those. And he wants to give more money directly to schools that they can spend on whatever they want. There are some programs, some categories of students that they would still have their own designated pots of money. And I think what the senator's referring to is how do we get from where we are now, especially after the districts have incurred cuts in recent years, to where we'd all like to be 8 or 9 years down the road. But it involves very difficult sort of political calculations because you will have people that would have done better under the governor's program than under existing law, and some who would have done worse. And so it's trying to kind of agree on the big picture things and then figure out how we get from here to there.
If this question is appropriate or irrelevant, where does this put teachers and protections for them and help for them?
Well, so the Education Coalition, which includes really the major stakeholders in education, came out with a letter that had certain principles. And one of the principles they advocated was no cuts, along the lines of really no school district should get less money next year than they otherwise would have if we just did nothing. And so I think that's why the Senate Democratic Caucus is introducing legislation that does try to raise the level of funding to all schools and does address the adequacy of funding issue that the local control funding formula currently doesn't address. And then in terms of flexibility, I absolutely agree with the governor as well as with Mac here that we need to have increased flexibility to school districts so they can spend the money how they want. But keep in mind there is a tension there between saying that versus not having any accountability at all. So one of the issues with the governor's proposal is a school could get additional funding if they, for example, have 50% more of their students who are English language learners or those on free and reduced lunch programs. But the school could actually take that money, the bonus money they get, and spend it on upgrading football equipment or on administrator salaries or whatever they want, because that is flexibility. And so there's a tension between flexibility and saying, if we're going to give you more money because you have certain students that may be disadvantaged, that money really ought to be spent on those students versus something totally different. And so that's another reason the Senate will be introducing legislation to provide more accountability there.
Well, it's something here that you're saying reminds me of just a quick follow-up question, notwithstanding being respectful to the intent of Prop 30. Right. Some of the latest polls coming out, the Gallup polls and the field polls, are saying that Californians actually, in large numbers, support what the governor's trying to do.
Absolutely, and if those questions were asked, because I read the questions, I would have answered exactly the same way, but they asked the wrong questions.
Interesting.
Because one of the questions, for example, said, would you support giving additional monies to a school district who had disadvantaged students if other school districts had to get less? I would vote. I would say yes. The question was changed to, would you do that if your school district got less? They would not have answered it the same way, right? And the way they framed giving money to these other schools, they used the term extra funding, which I would simply disagree with. It's just not accurate, because we've made 5 years of cuts to schools. We haven't even brought them back to where they should be. To say we have any extra funding is a little odd to say that. So my view is what they should have asked is, before we even bring your school district or all school districts up to a level of funding where they should be, do we want to take existing funds and start transferring them from one district to another? And I think there is a basic conceptual difference there where we in the Senate want all school districts to rise first before we start doing transfers of funds from one district to another.
Obviously, this issue is not settled this early on here in this year. Thank you for that perspective, Senator. We go back to the questions. This is from S. from Redondo Beach. S asks, the governor's proposed budget currently eliminates funding for vocational centers. How will the state handle the fallout when non-college bound students have nowhere to go? So Southern California Regional Occupational Center has nearly 10,000 students registered and 300 teachers who will soon be out of jobs if funds are not allocated.
So that's another reason that legislation is being introduced to fix the governor's local control funding formula, because under it, career technical centers such as SCROC would be virtually eliminated. Not only is that unfair, it is completely antithetical to our push here in the state to give people more access to career tech courses, to give them training and skills that they could use to get a job in the workforce. So that also sort of shows that there are major parts of a local control funding formula that were simply not well thought out, because I don't believe they intended to eliminate SCROC, but it does do that. And so I think what should happen is we have a policy-based discussion on the local control funding formula, instead of doing it as a budget item where there's not as much discussion or policy committee hearings. And what the Senate is going to do is to run a policy bill, because as Max said, half of funding, of state funding, goes to education, of which a significant portion goes to K through 12 education. And to simply do it as a budget bill, I think doesn't do it justice. It really should go through policy committees.
All right, next question is from Paula from Torrance. Paula asks, what is going on with the governor's plan to transfer adult education funds from K through 12 to the community college system? And maybe, Mac, you have a ledge analyst's perspective on that.
Well, we do. We had come out with a report before the governor came out with his plan talking about adult education. The governor would put it all, currently it's provided by both community colleges and K-12 districts. The governor would put it all under the community colleges. That doesn't mean that existing adult education programs in districts, there may be people out there who work on them or run district programs. They still might exist, but they would depend on their funding from the community colleges. We're not sure that's the best way to go. In fact, if anybody's interested, they can go on our website and look at our report. We think we should take advantage of both K-12 districts programs and the community colleges, get some of the funding inequities taken care of and addressed, and have all of these competitors providing services for adult education programs, because it's a really important part of our school system. And we actually agree with the governor that it should be one of those programs that's funded separately as like maintain it as a categorical program. But we have quite a few problems with it, and again, I would suggest that people take a look at our report if they're interested in more information.
Great. Just for folks who are watching right now here at the halfway point of our conversation, this is a live internet town hall broadcast talking about the 2013 state budget, and our guests are Senator Ted Lieu from Southern California and Mac Taylor, who is our legislative analyst. And we do encourage folks who are watching, if you have a particular question that's prompted by some of our discussion here, just look to the right of your screen. You will see a prompt for you to enter your name and your location, and any question that you have, write it into the box, hit submit, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. I will just say real quick, just a little insider question. The question I was going to go to next, I don't actually see it on my screen, but we'll go to one of the other ones as soon as possible. So we'll get to the questions here as soon as we can. Then I'll just go ahead and read it off the air. We'll go to a question from Sean from Los Angeles. What is realistically going to be done about amending or repealing AB 109?
So Assembly Bill 109 was the realignment shift that we did in California as a result of federal court orders saying we have to reduce the prison population in California due to prison overcrowding. Realignment has largely been successful in terms of reducing prison overcrowding. However, it has some rough edges, and no law ever was or ever will be perfect. And we always have to make changes to laws when there are unintended consequences. One of the issues that has come up is sex offenders who are state parolees who wear GPS ankle bracelets are cutting them off at increased levels. And that was just something that wasn't really thought through during the realignment process. And I have a bill that will increase the penalties on sex offenders who cut off GPS ankle bracelets to deter them from doing so. Because the studies show that a sex offender who is monitored by GPS has a recidivism rate 3 times less, which means they're 3 times less likely to commit a new crime and then to land back in prison, which exacerbates the prison overcrowding problem. And hopefully we can fix some of the rough edges of realignment. But because we're under a federal court order, AB 109 is here to stay, and we need to do the best job we can to implement it.
Mac, any perspective? Obviously, realignment, some tweaks, as the senator refers to and alludes to. Any perspective fiscally from your department?
Well, I think we share a very similar view as the senator, that it makes sense from a large conceptual point of view. These are people, these sort of non-serious, non-violent, who were serving very short periods of time in prison and then being paroled in the local communities. And the thought was the local communities have a strong interest, because they're always coming back to them, to take care of them, to provide whatever services they think are appropriate, whatever probation services or mental health services or whatever, that they have a strong interest in being successful in dealing with them, because they're going to be in their community in any case. So we think conceptually it makes sense, but I think the senator's right. When you do something as quickly as we had to do it, there are going to be some things that we want to play with. Maybe we need to adjust some of the funding for counties. We may need to help them with providing added jail space for certain counties, things like that. That's going to take some time. You don't build a jail overnight. Some counties are really in a very bad situation as far as their capacity on jails. Others are not. And as the senator said, it's working better in many counties than it is in some others. And I think we're just going to have to keep revisiting it to make it work as well as possible.
All right, thank you folks for these great questions. We go to another one. This is James from Lomita. Why is the Superior Court of California, the County of Los Angeles, closing 10 entire courthouses due to state budget cuts? Aren't the courts and access to justice a basic function of the state? And here's a key great question when we've talked about surplus and we've talked about balance and protecting important funding. Here is an entity of state government, an arm of state government that we've had billions of dollars cut, layoffs in our court system. Let's talk about this, not just in Los Angeles, but here in the state of California.
Well, that person is right on. with that question. That's one reason that I worked with Senator Noreen Evans, who's chair of Judiciary Committee, and we, along with other senators, sent a letter to the governor saying, for the May revise, please look at removing the cuts to the courts this year and start restoring some of the court services. My view is that when we continue to make cuts through third branch of government, not only are we hurting that branch and all the people that need access to it, but we're hurting our own branch because it is through the courts that the laws we pass are enforced. So my hope is that with the additional revenues that we're getting in, a small portion of that can be used to help restore the funding to the courts.
Great. Now, Mac, I know the Legislative Analyst's Office has probably been watching this funding issue with the courts carefully, too.
We've done a lot to the courts. We've a lot of general fund reductions. The legislature has tried to backfill many of those reductions with other sources of one-time funds so that their funding has gone down somewhat, although not as dramatically if you just looked at the general fund portion. But the courts have had to deal with rising workloads. And so it has been tough on them, and I think it's how, almost every program area took reductions, and the courts were no exceptions. And I think going forward, it's just how do we make sure we're pushing the courts to be as efficient as possible, to use more, electronic and IT-related services to process things more efficiently. At the same time, I'm sure, as the senator said, we're going to be looking at maybe there are selective augmentations in the future as money's become more available to ameliorate some of the more severe cuts that were taken.
But I know it's frustrating for Californians who are using our court system, whether it's small claims court or misdemeanors, whatever it might be in the court system, to have your case deferred for months because there's simply not a courtroom open and there's a backlog in cases. So this is definitely frustrating for a lot of Californians.
Absolutely, and especially as you mentioned on more the civil side, versus where you tend to take the cuts. So you have to keep up with your felony and misdemeanors.
Right. All right. We'll go back to the questions here. And again, we've talked so much about K through 12 funding. Let's talk a little bit more about higher up with higher education. Obviously, been a tremendous victimization of higher education, my words, in the last couple of years with higher tuition rates, access to students for classes, tremendous problems here. And we want to see how this will affect us in 2013. Benjamin from Los Angeles asks, what are you doing to help lower the cost of attending public higher education in California? It's become so expensive to the point that I'm actually finding it cheaper to study outside of the state. I'd rather be in California.
So one of the good effects of Proposition 30 is it prevented additional tuition increases that were going to happen at some of the higher educational institutions. Absolutely, I agree with the governor's current budget proposal where he increases funding to higher education. I think we need to continue doing that, not only to help students, but if you look again at the economic sectors that we can do well in California, virtually all of them require some sort of higher education. The days when we can simply have a lot of workers have only a high school diploma and work well in California, those days are going to be soon behind us, and we're moving to a different economy where we're going to require people to have some sort of education above high school in order to really succeed in this state. And that's why we need to absolutely restore the cuts we've made to higher education.
We heard news just this last week that many of the new admissions here at UC and possibly even CSU, maybe it was the other way around, are students from out of state, not here in California. Does that play any role in any of this discussion we're having?
There is an increase, and there will be an increase because out-of-state students do pay more money into the system. However, if we can continue to restore the cuts to higher education, hopefully we can start mitigating that issue.
And actually, the next question segues right into that. Norma from Los Angeles, what about the cuts to universities and colleges? Is there any effort to reverse that? Perfect timing, Norma.
We are reversing them right now. So in this next budget that we do in a couple months, I expect to have higher education cuts start to get restored, and it will continue to be restored next year and for years after.
Any further perspective on this, Mac?
Well, back to the prior question, I just want to make it very clear. I think I probably have a different take than the questioner. The state's educational costs are some of the lowest in the country. Our community colleges are by far the lowest in the nation. Our California State University tuition are amongst the lowest in the nation, and our UC are about average. So even after these tuition increases, we're a very, very affordable state. And the legislature and the governor should be given credit because they really kept up on financial aid. such that even with those tuition increases, many families, those below $80,000 in family income, annual income, really were not affected dramatically by these tuition increases. So I think the legislature deserves credit there. While I know the legislature is very interested in restoring some of the cuts to the universities, we also need to look, as the governor suggested, at ways to make sure we're delivering these services as efficiently as possible. People tend to focus on how much they're paying, the student and family. We need to look at what's the total cost that we're paying to provide an education. To the extent we can keep that cost down, we can make it truly affordable for more people. So you had the governor suggesting, for example, do we increase our level of or online classes as a way to drop our cost? What are other mechanisms, whether it's year-round education at the universities? Steps like that to make us more efficient. And I think we need to look there too.
Great. All right, we'll take a next question here. This is regarding, I think it's from Chris from Oakland, regarding Senate Bill 209. Your sense of if and when this might pass and become effective. Had you just received a franchise tax board notice of proposed assessment, how would you personally respond to your choices? Would you agree and pay? Would you disagree and request a franchise tax board delay acting on protest? Would you disagree and have the franchise tax board proceed with your protest? Or D, anything else? If you need me to read those back, that's okay. That's
I would actually advise
question.
them to contact a tax lawyer before I would give advice to their specific case, because it may be very case specific. But what Senate Bill 209 goes to is the issue of whether we should punish people for relying on a California tax incentive that was legal 5 years ago, but the courts have now found had some constitutional problems. And my answer is we should not penalize people for relying on the law as it was written. And so what my Senate Bill 209 does is it prevents retroactively going backwards and taking money from people and giving them to the state. Instead, we should equalize it through another means where we allow people who didn't have access to a tax incentive to have access, thereby solving the constitutional issue and also not having any retroactive tax assessments. That's what my bill does. It really goes to the rule of law. We can't really function as an economy or have commerce or have businesses and citizens trust our government if they can't rely on the laws that we write and know that we're going to protect them if they're found out later to somehow be wrong or unconstitutional.
All right, thank you for that clarification. Senator Ted Lieu from Southern California and Mac Taylor, the legislative analyst, joining us here in this hour, talking about the state budget 2013 in this internet broadcast. We go back to the questions. Nina from Redondo Beach asks or says, everyone needs a safe and healthy place to live. Will you be supporting Senate Bill 391, the Homes and Jobs Act? I believe this is Senator DeSaulnier's bill that will provide funding for affordable housing and create 29,000 jobs for Californians.
That's an easy question. I'm a co-author of that bill, and I absolutely support it.
Great. All right. Well, that's good. Well, just tell us a little bit more. Why is this important? I mean, obviously, this comes down to just some much needed revenue for California, and also helping people.
Low-income housing continues to be a major challenge in California, and a lot of folks can't live in a home or have access to a home that's anywhere near where they actually work. And so if we can have more low-income housing, not only do we benefit those people, hopefully we can also start cutting down on large commuting distances that some people have to travel.
Great. All right. We'll take the next question that comes from Rosa from Los Angeles. She says, how will the federal sequestration affect the state budget? Mac, you obviously have a question or response to that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were most worried months ago that the sequestration would be tied with other problems where we didn't have a federal budget, the cuts would be more severe. We were more worried about the effects on the economy. The sequestration itself, we don't expect a very significant effect. And that's in part because while we'll lose some federal dollars to our budget, it's not the type of things where the legislature has to backfill them. So it doesn't present a kind of a fiscal pressure that we're going to have to take money to make up for these cuts. They're typically extra monies that we can spend because the federal government gives them to us. So because the cuts were relatively small percentage-wise, phased in over a couple of years, and we don't have to backfill them, we really don't expect to see a real significant effect on our budget for the coming fiscal year.
Senator, is this typical of some of the questions you're getting from your constituents about how we're being affected on the federal level?
It is, and so we will have certain areas that will be hit disproportionately harder, such as some of their aerospace firms and defense-related industries. But on the other hand, we're a very diverse economy in California, and to me, the fear is not so much the sequestration for this year, but the fact that the federal government has to make a huge number of cuts over the remaining 9-10 years. And if they don't start getting revenues, then if they do those future cuts, then that will start having a larger effect in California.
Close to home, what is the sequestration potentially effect is it having potentially and now on the LA Air Force Base, for example?
So I happen to also serve my reserve duty at LA Air Force Base, and it certainly affected so the federal workers there. And so civilian employees, there are always at threat of furloughs. There are things that the Air Force is unable to do because of these sequestration cuts. So it definitely has a huge effect on federal entities as opposed to the state, which were just much more diverse.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. If you have a lot of civilian military employees, so around bases, and some of the universities will have a reduction in research funding. Again, that's not things that we backfill that will put general funding money in, but certainly we don't mean to in any way diminish the effect that it can have on a localized basis in certain communities throughout the state.
All right, thank you for that. We go to some other questions here. Jennifer from Los Angeles, what are we doing to get health insurance for the millions of people who don't have health care now? Once again, something that will affect our budget, the Affordable Care Act, and how California deals with it. And I know, in particular, one of the things we're having concern with, even as we speak this week, the governor cutting Medi-Cal funding by 10% last year, and then how that is going to affect negatively, some say, how we implement Affordable Care Act here in the next year and a half.
So I'm pleased that California is one of the first states to go forward to fully implement the Affordable Care Act. We've got our health exchanges that are working day and night trying to figure out the best way to provide coverage to millions of more people in California that never had coverage before. And that's very exciting. You are going to have people whose quality of lives will be better because of the health care coverage that they will have that they previously did not. My view is we need to make sure that it's also done in a way that doesn't have people take advantage of those folks. So let me give you an example. We know that when you have any program where you have lots of people getting a benefit, there's always going to be fraud involved. And if you currently have an HMO plan, before that HMO can market to people and say, hey, sign up with us, and they do it in a foreign language, that document, that marketing material gets reviewed by the Department of Managed Care. But if it's a PPO plan and that health insurance company is trying to market to folks and get them to sign up, no one reviews that marketing material. So they could say things that are completely false or misleading and then sign people up who may not know what they're getting. So I have a bill that actually would give the PPO plans the same regulatory scrutiny that HMO plans currently have. Because we know that when these health plans are going to start signing up lots of people, some will do it correctly and above board, but there's always going to be folks out there that are going to try to take advantage of what's going on and mislead people.
Right. Mac, any comment from the perspective of Ledge Analyst on what is really a key element of this year's budget and next year's too?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly going to be fiscal issues related to expanding healthcare. Now, the federal government is picking up a lot of those costs in the near term and even in the longer term, at least under the current arrangements. But the state will bear some additional cost. And there's just a lot of uncertainty about them because we don't know how many people will participate through exchange, how much Medi-Cal, our basic healthcare program for low-income people, will grow. So it does create a lot of uncertainty in both the near and the out years. So you have those kind of fiscal issues. You got the regulatory issues that the senator was referring to. You have the starting up a health exchange where people can go and access healthcare if they're between 100 and 400% of the poverty level, so a lot of folks that can't get insurance through their employers can access it. Well, even if they're outside those income limits, they can be subsidized within them. But even if they're outside, they can go to this exchange. So you have this real, a lot of activity going on and making sure that it works well. And there's not a lot of time, so you're going to see a lot of activity in the next year or so in trying to make it work as well as we can. But a lot of issues to deal with.
Right. All right. Final question here. This will be from Greg from Los Angeles. And folks, we really do appreciate all your questions. Can you discuss the efforts to deal with climate change in the budget? Once again, another element out there that affects us fiscally, not to mention environmentally here in California.
Well, I believe that the biggest long-term threat to our national security is climate change. It will have profound effects on California as well as the nation if we don't mitigate the ways that we're spending carbon and putting it in the air. One of the ways we can try to mitigate climate change is through natural resource conservation. I have a bill that will take some of the money that we're going to get from the auction revenues from cap and trade and make sure that is used for resource protection and conservation, because we know when you do that, you will just naturally reduce the amount of carbon that's going into the air.
All right. Thank you for that question, Greg. Just some parting shots here as we wrap up this hour. It's been informative. We've talked nearly an hour, but obviously you could say we haven't even scratched the surface. But one thing I do want to talk about, too, is that the lessons learned from the past and also the rainy day fund. We had the surplus back at the turn of the century, coming into the 21st century, the dot-com craze and brought a lot of extra money in the state coffers. Right. Some say that we squandered it, again, my words, and spent it and not saved it. How important is the lessons learned from that experience, and then, of course, the subsequent recession and not having any funds and having a deficit, and what we're doing with a rainy day fund here in 2013 with this surplus that we might have?
So when I came into the Assembly last decade, it was 2005, we went through a period of some of the darkest days in California history. For a period of 2 to 3 years, we cut over $60 billion from the state budget. There were cuts that no one wanted to make, but we had to do it to be fiscally prudent. As a result of that fiscal prudence and the growing economy, as well as Prop 30, we now do have a balanced budget with a projected surplus. And I do believe that with California's natural resources, our people, our innovation, our best days are ahead of us, and it's very exciting now to be in the state legislature, knowing that we're not only turning the corner, but really accelerating to a better and brighter future.
So you do feel that California is the place where future happens, still?
It always has been and always will be.
And Mac, let me get your final perspective on this. If we pull this off, as they say, if we reverse what has been a tremendous budget deficit and we bring ourselves back into fiscal prosperity, at least fiscal health, it could have national implications. Do you agree with that? And any other perspective?
Well, I mean, California is a huge part of the national economy. And that's why people look to us when we're having problems. We can drag down the national economy, and we tend to be a trendsetter. But to go to your point on the lessons learned, I think it's a really important one. One thing that I repeatedly tell my bosses when they ask for my advice is that we don't want to go through this again, or at least to the degree that we went through it. And while I wouldn't say that we squandered resources, I would say that if you look back at that chart we had to go through pretty quickly, that ups and downs of revenue, we know we will have those again. And the lesson, I think, is when we have a really good revenue years, as the senator said earlier, we can't spend it all. And if we do spend some of it, it should be on one-time things so that you don't build in that spending base to a level that you can't afford when the revenues turn down. So take the money, some of the money off the table during the good times, put it in a reserve, build it up to a level that we haven't done in the past. I think we probably need a reserve of about at least 10% to get us through, not necessarily take care of all of our problems, but to help buy time for the legislature when revenues do turn south. So as far as lessons learned, take money off the table during good times, build up the reserve to help you during the bad times.
Great. Well, still more lessons to be learned, and obviously we will see how this all lays out and fleshes out come June 30th of 2013, our constitutional deadline, and a lot can happen between now and then.
And if people want more information, they can also follow me on Twitter or on Facebook as well.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen, both, for taking the time to dissect this and get into the nuances of what may seem like a dry thing, but it has really affected so many people for so many years, young and old, here in California, and it's nice to see a little bit of sunshine. So thank you for putting a little sunshine and transparency in some of this discussion. We appreciate both of you. Thank you. Senator Ted Lieu from Southern California, also chair of the Senate Labor Committee, and also Mac Taylor, who is our nonpartisan legislative analyst from the Legislative Analyst's Office. And we thank everyone for your questions and your input and your attention. And we want to remind you that this program will be archived right here on this website. If you want to bring folks later on to watch it again or to just check or follow up on some of the questions that are asked, listen to some of the answers again, it'll be right here on the website. So check back and watch it again if you'd like. So that ends our live internet town hall here from Sacramento. Along with Mac Taylor and Senator Lieu, I'm Brian Green from the state capitol. Thank you so much for watching.